Today, I'll be doing Rutgers. So first, I'll talk a little bit about the head coach, and then I'll talk some about the roster, and then go through their schedule game by game, and give you a predicted winner and loser for each game. So head coach Greg Schiano enters his fifth season as the head coach of Rutgers since being rehired as their head coach. He was their head coach for 11 seasons before from 2001 to 2011. So this is his 16th overall season as the head coach of Rutgers. And Rutgers is his only college head coaching job. And his overall record as a head coach is a losing record, only 87 and 95. But the first time he was the head coach at Rutgers, the first four seasons he was there were losing seasons, but then six out of the last seven seasons he was there, they had winning records. And then since he's been back at Rutgers, up until last year, it had been bad. The first year, just 3 wins. The second year, 5 wins, and then third year, 4 wins, and then last year, 7 wins with a bowl win. So Rutgers this year had the 36th ranked recruiting class. And good news for them is they returned 74% of their production. That's a lot. And most of that is defensive production. Rutgers, to me, looks like a similar team to Iowa. They're going to have a good defense, but not a very good offense, except Iowa's defense is even better than Rutgers is, and Rutgers' offense is not as bad as Iowa's is. Starting on the offensive side of the ball at quarterback, this is what I think is going to stop Rutgers from being a good team this year. Their quarterback is terrible. They were already terrible at throwing the football last year, averaging only 137.5 passing yards per game, which ranked 124th in the country. And they only ranked 94th in points per game last year at only 23.2. But they bring in a transfer quarterback from Minnesota. He was the starter for all 12 games for them last year. His name is Ethan Kelly Manis, and he's a terrible quarterback. Last year at Minnesota, he had only in that 12 games 1,838 passing yards and 14 touchdown passes. And he is not accurate at all. He only completed 53.1% of his passes, and he had a terrible yards per throw average at only 6.3. And he only had 200 or more yards last year in 2 games. So at wide receiver, they were terrible here last year too, and I think they're going to be a little better here this year. So they bring in two FCS transfer wide receivers. They bring in Demir Miller, who was the best receiver in the FCS last season. In 11 games, he had 1,293 yards and 90 catches. And 9 touchdowns, averaging 14.4 a catch. And then they bring in Nazim Brantley, who didn't play in 2023, but in 2022 had in 10 games 53 catches for 903 and 9 touchdowns, averaging 17 a catch. Now, of course, FCS defenses are a lot different than Big Ten defenses, but as bad as Rutgers receivers were last year, I think that getting these two receivers is still a positive, even though they're coming from the FCS level. So at running back, they return one of the best running backs in the Big Ten, a really good running back, Kyle Monaghy, who actually led the Big Ten in rushing yards last season. He'll no doubt play in the NFL someday. He had last season at 1,262 yards on 242 carries and 8 touchdowns, averaging 5.2 a carry, and had 7 games of over 100 rushing yards. But they don't really seem to have a good running back number two to help him out. And on the offensive line, they are in pretty good shape here. They had a good offensive line last year. They allowed the fewest sacks of all teams in the Big Ten, and they've got three full-time starters coming back on the offensive line, and all five starters this season have started at least two games in college. So on the defensive side, they've got eight starters coming back, and Rutgers, even though you might not realize it, because I know they weren't getting much attention going into last season because they had been terrible for so long, but they actually had a pretty good defense last year. They only gave up 19.6 points per game on average, and they had a top 10 secondary last year. And I think that they're going to have a defense that will be in the top five of the Big Ten this year. I don't think it'll be as good as Ohio State or Oregon or uh, Penn State or Michigan, but other than that, them and Iowa are probably the next best defenses. Maybe Rutgers would be the sixth best defense in the Big Ten. So on the defensive line, they've got Aaron Lewis coming back, who is one of the best defensive linemen in the Big Ten. In 24 games these past 2 years combined, he has 105 tackles and 70 total pressures, and he has five sacks and a forced fumble and two pass breakups. And they've got Wesley Bailey, who has in 2 years combined 57 tackles and 7.5 sacks and four fumble recoveries and five pass breakups and 18 total pressures. And then at linebacker, they've got two really good linebackers coming back. They've got Mohamed Tor, who had last year 93 tackles and 4.5 sacks, nine total pressures, and two pass breakups, and an interception and a forced fumble. And they've got Tyrene Powell coming back, who has in 20 games these past two seasons combined 100 and 24 tackles and six pass breakups and five sacks and 12 total pressures and a forced fumble. And then in the secondary, they're really good at safety. They've got three good safeties coming back. This is one of the Big Ten's best safety units, probably the biggest strength of Rutgers' whole team. So they've got Flip Dixon coming back, who had last year at 76 tackles and five pass breakups and an interception and a quarterback pressure and a forced fumble. And they've also got Shaquan Loyal, who had last season at 66 tackles and two pass breakups and an interception and a sack and a forced fumble. And they've got Desmond Igmanoson, who had 64 tackles and a sack and a pass breakup and a fumble recovery and four total pressures last season. And then at cornerback, they've got one of their two starting corners coming back who is good, Robert Longerbeam, who had last year 43 tackles and 10 pass breakups and an interception and two forced fumbles and two fumble recoveries and a sack. But the other starting corner is questionable. So on special teams, at kicker, they look solid. They returned their kicker, but they're going to have a new punter this season. So now, moving on to the predictions, they start the year against a team called Howard. This will be an easy win against an FCS opponent. And then they play Akron, which should be another easy win. So then they play on the road at Virginia Tech after getting a week off in a big non-conference game for them. So both defenses are going to be good this year. I think this will be a low-scoring game. But like I said in the Virginia Tech video, I think Virginia Tech has more offense than Rutgers does, and their offense will be able to make some big plays to get a win over Rutgers. Because Rutgers offense, I don't think will be able to do hardly anything in this game. and the game's on the roads, and Virginia Tech's a tough place to play. But this will be a close game, in my opinion. It's one that Rutgers doesn't have no chance to win. So then Washington at home on a Friday. So Washington's offense is going to struggle this year because of how bad I think the offensive line for them is going to be. I think Rutgers' defense will be the difference in this game, and they'll get the win in a close one. So I think the Rutgers defense will be able to take advantage of that weak offensive line of Washington and shut their offense down. And Washington's defense, I think, is going to struggle overall, allowing Rutgers, who doesn't have a very good offense, to be able to score enough to win this one. They'll probably score 20 something in this game. So then they play on the road at Nebraska. So both defenses are pretty similar. They're both going to be good. And both offensive lines are pretty similar. They're both good. But the difference here, I think, is quarterback. Nebraska's five-star quarterback Dylan Raiola is so much better, I think, than this transfer that Rutgers has brought in. So I think he'll make some plays for Nebraska to get a close win, probably a pretty low scoring game. So then they play Wisconsin at home. So Wisconsin's defensive line is not as good as Rutgers is, but the rest of their defense, I think, is even better than Rutgers. And they've got a good offensive line and a better quarterback transfer. And they've got two good running backs, not just one. I think Wisconsin is going to be a little too good for Rutgers to win this one, even at home. So I think it'll be pretty close, but Wisconsin, I think, will win by like a touchdown. So then they play UCLA at home, a team that is going to be pretty average this year, in my opinion. I think they've probably got a little more offense than Rutgers does, but I think Rutgers has a better defense. So I'm going to go with home field advantage and say Rutgers wins a close one. So then they play on the road at USC. So I talked about this in the USC video that Rutgers defense will be good enough, I think, to slow down the Lincoln Riley offense a little in this game, but they can't shut them down. Rutgers defense is good, but it's not elite like a top 10 defense in the country. And Rutgers, I think, will be able to run the football some in this game because USC, I think, is going to struggle still defensively this year. But they don't have enough in the passing game to keep up with USC, and it'll be competitive, I think, and close most of the game. But I think USC will pull away and win by around two touchdowns. So then they play Minnesota after getting a week off. So I said in the Minnesota video that both teams are pretty similar. I'd probably give Rutgers a little bit of an advantage defensively, and then Minnesota a little bit of an advantage offensively. So I'm going to say Rutgers wins this game, being at home. Uh, Probably just by like a field goal. And then they play on the road at Maryland. So Rutgers defense, I think it will be the difference in this game and will get them this win even on the road in a close one. So Rutgers offense isn't going to score a whole lot in this game. Maryland's defense won't be horrible, but it won't be good. And Maryland's offense, though, I don't think will be able to win them this game now. They won't be able to score much because they lost that quarterback at Tonga Viola. I think they're really going to struggle this year because of that. So then they play Illinois at home. I'd give Rutgers an advantage on the offensive line in this game and at running back. And Illinois, their quarterback Luke Altmaier is bad, but I think Rutgers transfer quarterback is even worse than him. But I would give Rutgers an advantage on the defensive line and at linebacker and at the safety position. And I'd give Illinois an advantage at cornerback. I've looked at both rosters pretty carefully, and I do think that Rutgers has more advantages than Illinois does, and they're playing at home, so it'll probably be pretty close. But I think Rutgers will win this one by around a touchdown. So then they end the season on the road at Michigan State. This will be a really close game. I think I could see it going either way. So Michigan State's defensive line isn't going to be that good. Rutgers is much better there, but the rest of Michigan State's defense can match up with Rutgers. I actually think Michigan State has a better linebacker and cornerback unit than Rutgers does, and Michigan State's offense, I think, will be a little bit better than Rutgers. It won't be good, but they've got a better quarterback transfer and more depth at running back than Rutgers does. So I'm just going to go with home field advantage and say Michigan State wins this one. So my final prediction for Rutgers is 7-5 overall and 5-4 in the conference. So mm, you can get mad and type in the comments that I just hate Rutgers and they're winning the Big Ten, but I think this is a pretty fair prediction for them because I have them improving their record by a game this year. So I do think that it's possible that they could maybe get to 8-4, but I do also think there's a good chance they could finish 6-6 again. But that will be it with this video, and please subscribe and thanks for watching, and I'll be back soon.